Ro, thanks for joining us. Can you talk about the greater alignment between the industry's actions and the values of contemporary society, which is a central theme of the upcoming Future Minerals Summit in Riyadh? What message will you and ICMM be bringing to the event?
ICMM's message at the event is actually quite simple, and it consists of just 3 words, which is mining with principles. And mining with principles is the promise that we make to our stakeholders that in the process of mining, we will do everything possible to maximize the benefit to society of the operations of mining and the products that are so essential to the lives we lead, and we will minimize the possibility of harm to people and the environment. 19 years ago, when ICMM was set up, the industry was in a moment of crisis. It had suffered accidents, and people had lost faith in the industry's willingness and ability to do the right thing. Today, the industry occupies a much more central role in the global economy and in the lives we lead. And in the future, the transition to a net zero economy will mean that the products of mining are going to be even more important to a global economy. So in that context, the idea that we mine with principles has never been more relevant or important. And really it emphasizes the fact that compliance with the law is the floor, not the ceiling, of how a company approaches its responsibility to society. And that's why ICMM has always tried to live out its principles that govern the way companies operate to ensure that benefits are maximized, costs are minimized.
And that fits in very well with your background, does it not, as a sustainability specialist? I remember when you succeeded Tom Butler as the organisation's CEO in April, I think you said arguably this is the most important decade for the industry. Can you elaborate on that, and is there a particular threat to the geographic region covered by the FMS event?
This decade is arguably the most important for the industry because it is the most important for the world at large. And the simple reason for that is we have 10 years in which to make really important progress towards the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. These are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that paint a picture of a world that is safe, fair, equitable, just, and sustainable. And the mining industry can be a hugely powerful force to achieve almost all of those sustainable development goals. In particular, the energy transition. And in the next 10 years, the data and the science are very clear. We need to make rapid progress towards a net zero economy in the next 10 years if we are to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. And none of that progress is possible without the metals and minerals that are the products of mining operations. So what we're going to find is that the next 10 years, the demand for mined products is going to go substantially higher than what we have seen in the past. And thus it becomes ever more important that the way those minerals and metals are produced is done in the most responsible way possible. If we do this well, not only will our industry have supported the most important transition the world has gone through in the last century, but we will have shown society that there is a relationship between the mining industry and society that benefits everybody concerned, and as a result, everyone whose lives are touched by mining can be made better. So the next 10 years really matter for that reason, and I believe our industry is extremely well positioned to take the mantle and demonstrate good performance consistently over that decade. And that's because we've had at least 20 years, in the case of ICMM, experience in understanding and learning the lessons, both from things that have gone well as well as from things that haven't gone so well.
Yeah, the criticality of minerals, of course, have been at the top of the agenda, particularly since COP26. And the need for these metals in the energy transition is going to require companies to venture into new regions, not unlike what we're talking about, the Arabian Shield. How can we as an industry ensure that the social and economic benefits of mining are maximised while the impacts are minimised, do you think?
Just as a point of how much more supply will need to come on stream, in order to meet the world's demand for copper between now and 2030, we will essentially have to open a new Escondida mine every year for the next 10 years. Now, for anybody who hasn't been to Escondida, it is the world's largest copper mine in Chile, but we currently only have one Escondida, we will need 1 escondida every year for the next 10 years in order to meet our demand just for copper. And it highlights just how much focus will be on ensuring the supply of these minerals. So how can that supply then be done in a way that ensures maximum benefit and minimum harm? The answer is to adopt a set of principles that are shared between the industry, government, civil society, and labor organizations that we all agree drive the industry towards better and better performance so that the benefits can be shared and the costs can be minimized. Now, this is where regulations play a really critical role. And in Saudi Arabia, of course, we have seen the development of a new mining law that aims to do just that. And as I said before, that is a really critical foundation on which companies can voluntarily go even further to make sure that their own practices allow for those benefits to be maximized. And if one company does it, or in our case, 28 companies do it, it then sets the standard for the entire industry, not just in this region, but around the world, to make sure that the whole industry and all the countries that depend on it are made better off.
That brings me to a slightly tricky question, if you don't mind. I mean, I think you've got 10 particular principles of the ICMM. Can I ask, have any companies had their membership re-evaluated because of transgressions? We all can think of some examples, but and are you targeting any particular type or size of company for membership to help reach your goals?
So where companies have not lived up to the principles and the commitments, and there's been unfortunate accidents like the tragedies at Juukan Gorge and Brumadinho, members have remained within the ICMM. The reason they've remained within the ICMM is because our belief is that working together, we can find solutions to the challenges that those companies are facing, learn from it, and move the industry along. Just to give you an example, after Brumadinho, ICMM, together with UNEP and with the Principles for Responsible Investment, created a new global industry standard for tailings management to make sure that tailings around the world are managed as safely and sustainably as possible. We were infinitely richer in that process for having had Vale in the room helping us develop that standard. Had Vale not been in the room and helping us develop that standard, we would have missed really important learnings from the company that was at the center of that. So our belief is that having people stay in the group and support them through what is an unfortunate and often deeply tragic incident is the way we can achieve maximum impact. And we are not seeking memberships or an increase in membership. We are open for membership, and any company that self-identifies with the mission of ICMM, which is leadership through collaboration, they are more than welcome to apply to join the organization, because we are made richer every time an organization that shares our beliefs and principles comes on board to share their unique experiences. But I do not see a larger membership as necessarily where we absolutely need to go, because there are other ways in which we as ICMM can influence the broader industry. And two of those that I want to highlight. One is that we have 37 members who are national or commodity mining associations. And they are a really important conduit for us to be able to influence the wider industry. Our estimate is that through those associations, we reach an extra 1,500 companies around the world that are not direct members of ICMM. The second way is through outreach and through proactively making ourselves and our information available to whoever wants to access it, to adopt it as their own policy. And that may be a government, or it may be companies that are not members of ICMM, which is why every piece of information that ICMM publishes is freely available for people to access and use. And my team and I are always on hand to help people localize that, understand it, adopt it where appropriate.
Yeah, and in fact, I think that answers what I was going to ask, because I mean, you've got 28 members and they account for a pretty impressive 650 sites, but there are 2,000 listed companies, and the numbers you've just quoted, I think, answers that. But one of the things that's always fascinated me, and it's somewhat controversial, but I noticed it was mentioned by a speaker yesterday. Do you or ICMM differentiate between the roles of companies that produce precious metals that I think have relatively little benefit for humankind in the long term, and base and energy metals, which of course are base metals, and then energy metals, which of course are deeply mired in difficulties at the moment, although some of the carbon ones are. Do you think of those companies different in some way, or do they all fall under your same principles?
The principles apply to all companies in ICMM, no matter what product they mine. And it is our belief that mining and metals processing activities, irrespective of product, have a baseline level of impact, both positive and negative, on people and the environment, which are required to be of a certain standard to make sure that we can live up to our promise for responsible and sustainable mining. And then, of course, there are commodity-specific issues that are dealt with through the principles. So some companies may find that aspects of the principles are less relevant to them because they're not engaging in a particular type of activity given their commodity mix. On the other hand, you do have certain commodity-specific issues that are not covered by the mining principles, and that is where the individual commodity standards, like copper mark, for instance, play a really important role in being able to supplement a baseline level of cross-commodity standards that we provide with some commodity-specific information.
Right. That brings me to my last question, if I may. I noticed that ICMM members are committed to a goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions, and that's scope 1 and 2, as I understand it, by 2050, which is in line with the ambitions of the Paris Agreement. How are you going to monitor that progress and report it, and will the general public take any notice?
As members pursue this goal of net zero scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 or sooner, every year from 2023 onwards, they will be reporting their emissions and progress on scopes 1, 2, and 3. That progress will be externally verified and assured, and we will be making public all of the data and assumptions that are used in setting targets and in measuring and reporting emissions. So it will be really open and transparent for people to see the progress the industry is making towards reducing emissions. In addition, we've also made a commitment to report in line with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD. So all companies from 2023 onwards, if they're not already doing so, will be reporting in line with TCFD, which is another set of disclosures that will enable our stakeholders to measure the progress of the industry. And what's really fascinating is between 2016 and 2018, the industry reduced its emissions by over 6%. And this was a time when the global economy grew its overall emissions by 3%. So I think people are noticing that an industry that has typically and traditionally been characterized as a slow mover, as a heavy emitting, high impact industry, is actually leading the way, not just in having made this collective commitment, which is quite unique amongst high impact and hard to abate industries, but that commitment comes off the back of proven reduction at a time when the global economy was growing. So I hope that as metals and minerals become a much more important part of our lives, as we switch our vehicles from petrol and diesel to electric, and as we consume great amounts of electronic devices where these minerals go, that we will all be conscious of the environmental footprint and the social impact of producing those metals and minerals. And our commitment, of course, is to be entirely transparent about our progress.
As a supplementary to that, I mean, obviously I'm convinced, I'm a mining engineer, and I know you speak to the Reuters and the FT a lot, and they're at this conference and they'll be in Saudi Arabia. The only thing that concerns me, and I think ought to concern the ICMM and the industry wider, is you don't get some of the general public newspapers and journalists learning about all these good things. You know, I haven't seen the Daily Mail here, for example, or even the Telegraph. So I'm not, you know, is there an initiative to get to the general media that the greater public read, rather than, you know, the financial people and people who are already bought into them?
I think what you'll see over the next 3 years from us is going to be a much greater effort to reach out to mainstream media and to the general public to share what mining is about, to be very open and transparent about both the benefits and the potential for harm from mining activity, and to help them see where the products they consume on a daily basis come from. Something I find as a quirk of our society is that we are so removed from where things come from, and we don't think deeply about the impacts that are caused in the production. And as a result, we perhaps don't change our behavior in ways we could to drive better behavior all through the value chain. Something I love doing is, in a room full of people, I ask, Oh, I first say, do you know, everything that is in this room is either mined or grown.
Oh, yeah.
And then I ask people to raise their hands if they've ever been to a farm, and almost the entire room raises their hand. And then I ask them to raise their hands if they've ever been to a mine or thought about a mine, and hardly anybody has.
No.
Which is odd, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
it's either grown or it's mined, but we have no idea where the mined minerals are coming from.
No.
So there's really, I think there's a huge amount of value in helping people see
I
that.
always use the same analogy as well. Okay, well, thank you very much. That's very enlightening.